Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Friday webinar session from everybody at Larson-Juhl. So, good afternoon. Hello, welcome from myself. I'm Matt George. I'm the Sales Director here at Larson-Juhl. This is the third of our webinar sessions that we've got. I'm delighted to have with us today Joe Palmer. So I'm going to introduce Joe if you want to come off video.
Hello there.
Hi, Joe.
Hi.
It's great to have Joe with us today in the third of our webinar sessions where we're going to talk to you about selling from the design bench. So do you want to do a little introduction first, Joe?
Yeah, by all means. I'm a picture framer who works in South Devon in Dawlish, and my husband Alec and I run our business, The Framing Lot, together. We both have our GCF qualifications and advanced qualifications and minor in textiles and conservation. And I'm also the chair and master of the Fine Art Trade Guild at the moment. We work off the high street, so we're in a slightly more unusual retail setting, but we still have the design desk and everything as a normal bespoke framer.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Joe. So,
Shall I disappear?
Joe. Yeah, no problem. So Joe's going to go off from video again, and then we'll hear a little bit more from Joe a bit later. Okay. So let me run through what we've got planned for you today. So welcome to the third of our webinar sessions. It's great to have you here today and listening to us sharing some more information, advice, help and support from us at Larson-Juhl to bring together the framing community whilst we're going through these challenging times. For those of you whose first webinar it is, then here's a little guide in terms of asking questions on Zoom. We encourage plenty of questions. We had a really good afternoon yesterday with John Price. Lots of questions at the end. And if you do want to ask a question, then use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and you'll be able to direct a question to us. We may answer some as we're going, or we may well just field them at the end of the session, but please feel free to send over any questions that you do have. We have disabled the chat facility, so even though your icon's there, you won't be able to use that. You can raise your hand, but as you can't chat, then we won't be able to answer that. But if you do put the Q&A in, then we will definitely look to answer them at the end of the session. So where are we in our week of webinars? Well, we started off on Wednesday with Manny Wallier talking about digital, and then John did a great session yesterday on framing masterclass. It was really good to get some of the feedback I've had since then from you. Created a lot of debate and questions at the end of it. Indeed, a lot of people have asked me about when they can view the webinar again. I will be putting all of the videos from the webinars and the presentation slides on the website. We'll be uploading those early next week so that you can then refer back to any of the webinars in your own time and use the presentations to help guide you and use some of the techniques. And we also will be looking at setting up some more webinars once we've got through this week, and indeed once we get back into normality. We think there's lots more sessions that we can do, whether that's following up on the framing masterclass session from John Price with a new session and some different sessions there. Or whether it's other things that you want to talk about, and we'll be providing you with a survey once we've finished the week of webinars so that you can give us your feedback and help direct us to what content you might want from us in the future. So in terms of today's session, you've got myself and Joe from the framing lot, and we'll be talking to you about selling from the design bench and some sales techniques. And then the final couple of sessions we've got at the start of next week, we've got Graham Perryman on Monday talking around creating your unique selling proposition and how you can do things a bit differently. And then finally on Tuesday, I'm delighted to say that we've got our friends from MHA Accountancy who can talk to you all things about business continuity, finances, job retention scheme, loans, grants, and help give you some advice on that side of your business. Now, I'm going to start the session today on selling from the design bench, and I'm going to start by talking to you about sales techniques. I'm going to share some of the things that I've learned from my time in the food and drink industry. Before I joined Larson-Juhl, which was only very recently in December, I spent a long time in food and drink industry. And before that, I started my career in retail, spent about a year working at Currys. And I've spent time since then working for Coca-Cola and some other sort of FMCG food and drink brands. Now, I've really enjoyed learning from the fantastic team at Larson-Juhl, and also from lots of you as I've been out on the road before lockdown. It's been fantastic to come and see you in your shops. I've been amazed by the diversity of the industry that we've got, the creativity of it. Our industry is very different to the previous industry I've come from. It is more creative, it's more design-led and touchy-feely. So I'm certainly not going to suggest that you should use all the methods that the big food and drink manufacturers use. However, I'm sure there's a few tips that you can pick up from today's session from myself. And then I'll hand over to Jo, and then Jo will spend the second part of the webinar making it a bit more framing specific. So she will consider the selling process that you go through with your customers and share some of her experiences that she's got in terms of selling and how you bring that to life in the shop. The first question that I want to pose to you is, do you have a sales plan? Do you know how to maximize the sales revenue and profit that you make from your business? Or do you sell the customer what they want and stick by the old adage that the customer is always right? And let the customer shape the moulding, mount board, and the design choices. Now, I'm sure for most of you, it's somewhere in between those two things. You probably don't have the time to write a complex sales strategy, and I'm certainly not suggesting that you need to do that. However, spending a little time thinking about sales techniques will help you maximize your profit. And that does typically go hand in hand with happy customers. Most people are prepared to pay a little extra for quality, especially in our industry. So guiding people into quality mouldings and using your experience and knowledge to do that is very useful for the customer as well as for you in terms of the the sales revenue that you take in from that. Now, there may be times when you want to provide a budget option for customers and they have a clear maximum amount that they want to spend, and it may not be very much. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But remember that people don't know what they don't know. They're coming to you for expert advice, ideas, and they're expecting you to help shape their choices. Of course, you should lead your sales strategy with a design lens. The framing really does have to complement the artwork. However, do you know your profit margins across the range of mouldings that you offer? And would this influence your choice of options for your client? Now, how would you consider the framing industry, a formal or an informal trade? Well, if you think about some of the more formal sales situations, the traditional double glazing salesman dressed in shirt and tie, pressurizing you to buy something that you may not need or want, or the car salesman who sits you in front of his desk and uses sales techniques to get you to pay more than you really want to, or that the car is actually worth. You know, they're not situations that most of us really enjoy being in, negotiating and feeling pressured in terms of sales. And it's nice that our industry is much more informal and relaxed. You know, dress-wise, we, wear what we're comfortable in and suits our personality and the look of the shop, and that's absolutely great. You know, we create a friendly environment where we put the clients at ease. Now, thinking about a few of the different traits around those two kind of different selling types, then certainly with the more harder sell, then, it's very much salespeople who like to talk. they like the sound of their own voice, they're very selly in terms of their approach with you. It can feel quite pressurized and them telling you what you should do. And it certainly doesn't make people feel comfortable and put them at ease. The flip of that, really, the softer sell, or you could call it more of a consultative sell, I think is much more of an approach for our industry and the types of conversations that we're wanting to have with clients and customers when we're in a sales consultation. You know, it's much more listening. There is a lot of questioning though, because we need to ask, we need to understand the requirements of the customer, probe around different questions to understand that. And then ultimately we do need to close, because, you know, we do need to be conscious of, you know, getting to the end of a sales process, and that time is money in terms of us going through that consultation process. Now, what I want to do is to just make you think a little bit about creating a positive impression. And this matrix that you can see on the screen is all about empathy versus projection, and the difference between high projection and low projection, and high projection and low empathy. And if you work your way kind of around the graph and looking first of all at that high pressure area on the matrix, you know, that is more typically that you know, more aggressive salesperson, maybe a car salesperson or a double glazing salesperson, where they tend to be quite loud and have a lot of high projection, but they're not really doing much listening. There's a lack of empathy there in terms of you as the customer. Then if you go into the quadrant below that, the take it or leave it, then that would typically be a sales environment where, you know, there's not a lot of projection going on there, but there's also not a lot of empathy, and it's really just letting you make up your own mind over what you want, and not really getting much back from the you know, the person that's helping you, the salesperson. When we're going through looking at high empathy, so we're able to listen and understand what customers want, but we're not very good at projecting ourselves and maybe communicating ideas and what we want, then that is typically classed as a weak scenario that we're in there, where we're not really able to do that. And really the ideal place that we want to be is the top right hand section. You know, we want to be able to do a lot of listening and understanding, a lot of questions, but also when we get to do the talking and the projection, then the customer wants to have confidence in knowledge and expertise from us, that we understand what we're doing and that they can get confidence and trust from that. So just let's have a little think about, you know, using empathy to try and relax your customers and what it is. Well, you know, empathy is about being attentive to the behavior of people, you know, taking into account the wishes and the needs of the other party. And there's 5 kind of basic rules for showing empathy with people, with customers. You know, talking less, definitely, and doing much more listening. But number 3 is really important, and Joe and myself have talked about this. It's actively listening. It's listening not only with what you're hearing, but it's the eyes and the emotion. You know, looking at the faces of our customers as they're explaining things to you, or as you're showing them mouldings. Or mount board or options. You know, how are they reacting? What are their emotions? What are they telling you with their eyes or their body language that can help you to shape the best solution for them? We do want to be asking questions to show interest, and particularly at the start, but asking better questions, you know, quality questions that can really get out of the customer what the information that you want, and I'll expand a little bit on that a bit later. In terms of using projection to gain trust and confidence from us, that's all about the communication of our attitude, energy, and the appearance, so that we can be professionally perceived. And professionally doesn't need to be in a suit and tie and, you know, a professional formal situation. It can absolutely be in a more informal and relaxed situation. But the importance is that the customer gains confidence in your expertise. And there's a few basic rules for that, the 3 6s. So the top 6 inches, which is all about attitude and your face and expression and how you come across to the customer. The bottom 6 inches, your shoes, but it's more general than that in terms of your appearance and how you look and how you feel and how that fits into what you're doing. And as I said, that doesn't have to be formal. It can be nice and relaxed in terms of the environment that you want to create. And then finally, the old saying about first impressions, it's important to get that energy out there, first of all, with what you say and be comfortable in that situation to create a good experience for the customer. The next thing I just want to share with you, and some of you may have seen this before, is the communication triangle or the rapport triangle. And the reason for showing this is to just think about trying to get quickly beyond that kind of facts and information and, getting fairly quickly in the sales process into some, emotional connection with the customer. So this model builds up from ritual cliche, which is all about kind of, yes-no conversations or just very quick conversations about weather and all those typical kind of ritual cliches that you have. Then building up into more facts and information and sharing some information around yourself or the artwork or the things that we're actually starting to talk about with the customer. What we really want to do quite quickly, though, is to try and get onto ideas and judgments, to start getting out of the customer their ideas and their judgments over what they think might help with what they're planning to have framed. But importantly, if we can really quickly get to that feelings and emotions, it's quite high up the pyramid. But I think for us in this industry, trying to get there quite quickly is really important. So if you had a customer come in with a piece of artwork, asking them about the story behind it, whether it's a family heirloom, trying to get that connection on the story really early on in the sales process and the conversation, the consultation with the customer will help to start quickly framing where you want to go in terms of ideas for design ideas for them, in terms of solutions around mouldings and mountboard and framing ideas. And then up the top is peak rapport, traditionally what you would get with family or very close friends. You may well have that with a few customers, though, particularly customers that you've known for a long time who become friends, and you do develop that really strong bond and connection with them. And Steve Jobs from Apple said a quote about getting closer than ever to your customers, and so close you can tell them what they need well before they realize it themselves. And I think the more information you can get out quickly at the start, then you can definitely get quicker into that situation where you're realizing for them and shaping them over the decisions that you want to make in terms of framing. Now, the last slide that I want to share with you before I hand over to Joe to talk to you about some of the framing specifics is around questioning and just helping you think a little bit about some of the questions that you pose when you're with customers. Do you think about the questions that you might pose, or do you just go into a kind of natural conversation when they come in? Well, there are some models that can be used for this, and this is a questioning funnel, starting off with open questions where you're getting lots of sort of general information there, very open. It might be a tell me about or describe for me about the story behind the artwork, talk to me about. You're going to get, a lot of information from that. Ask the question, be quiet and let the customer talk for a bit and see where they go. Once we've got through some of those, then we'll start getting into a bit more specific information. So there's probing questions around who, what, when, why, and how, trying to get a bit deeper into narrowing down the information that you want through some really good probing questions to get the information that you need to help come up with the solutions. And then finally, you've got closed questions, which are typically going to get back a yes, no answer. So, certainly very useful when you may be getting into moulding choices over whether you like those mouldings, but getting into that yes, no, used a little bit later on in the consultation process. You certainly don't want to open up with them, but that will help you to get into more specifics over what the customer actually wants and their needs for you to help shape that. Okay, thank you very much from myself. I'm now going to just ask Jo to unmute herself and then carry on and pick up from here.
Thank you very much, Matt. So just to start off, the talk that I'm just going to do here with these slides is based on an article that was written by Annabel Rushton and appeared in the Larson-Juhl business supplement in the latest edition of the Guild's magazine, Art and Framing Today. So if you do get a chance, if you're a member or you're a subscriber, if you do get a chance to have a read of that, that also holds some useful information. And of course, this is a subject that we could talk about for many hours. So today, in the short time that we've got together, this is just a brief summary of ideas, a starting point to get your thought processes going, and is based mainly on designing for bespoke orders. Can you put the next slide up, Matt? Thank you. So first of all, a shout out to Vicky Kirby from Wildwood Gallery for the photographs that Larson-Juhl have used on the slides. And we're going to start talking about the aesthetics, and that's all about creating that right environment to make your customers feel at ease. And presentation is what we're all about. This is the very first chance for customers to see how you choose to present things and to gauge what they're walking into. So the first point here is the lighting. And daylight bulbs are pretty standard for an awful lot of people these days, using LED, you get colour accuracy and so on. You make sure that your products look the best they can, and there's so many different options that you can use to create style in your own shop. What it's also useful to do is check out the lighting at different times of the day. So what looks great in the morning might not look so great in the evenings, you know, especially when we get into the winter months and the nights are drawing in. So have a look at different times of day and make sure that you're hitting it about right. Then onto the design bench itself. So the right height is very important, comfortable for you as a working surface, but also for your customers. Get rid of all the clutter so that they see a nice space that they can put their work down onto. And having weights there is very important, especially with curly prints and things that come in. But surface is also important. I personally have always preferred to use something like a short pile carpet in a very neutral colour, a grey or something, simply because things like wood can scratch and mark too easily, but you could just as easily use a cushioned vinyl or something like that. Softer surfaces are kinder to delicate mouldings, particularly if customers are bringing in their own frames and plonking them down on the desk. If you do choose to use carpet, don't forget, don't use loop carpet because it will stick to the Velcro on the back of moulding chevrons. Use a short pile instead. And with your design desk, keep a dedicated area if possible. If you can't and you need to use it as an additional workspace, then make sure that you can clear it away quickly and you're seen to be doing the right thing with whatever customer work is on there. Customers are going to be watching to see how you use, how you move other people's work around. And the other thing that we've always found useful is to have a small step stool. It helps with shorter customers so that they can kind of look down onto their work and get a better idea of it. Make sure whatever you have is steady on the floor, and ideally have a handle of some kind that they can hold on to. Thinking about your walls, obviously you want to have a nice good variety of chevrons on there, and you may be limited by space. That may be something that dictates how many you have. Always important not to just select mouldings on price. Customers will pay for quality and style, and it's good to have a variety on there. One person's too many chevron samples is another's not enough. So this is very much a personal call. But too few can be just as bad as too many. And don't forget that you won't always be bringing them all off the wall at the same time. Well, you'll never be doing that. Most importantly with your chevron walls, keep them clean and tidy and organised. Make sure your chevrons are uniform in size if you can. Presentation, as I say, is key. And also use your walls to have examples. It's always easier to explain a process to a customer if you can say, like that one, and point to something. So have examples on there. It will also spark ideas. We have one of the tower poppies on our wall, and we have framed more than I can think of now as a result of that, people seeing it there. If you don't have very much space, you could have a screen up and have a slideshow, and the ability then to go on to particular pictures to show techniques and things as well. With your shop front, make sure that it is welcoming. How does it look from the other side of the street? Go outside and have a proper look. Ask other people what they think of the outside of it, and make sure that you keep your windows up to date and fresh. But also make sure that you're clear about what you do. If your main business is framing, make sure that message is very loud and clear from outside your shop. There are an awful lot of framing businesses where it isn't clear what they do. The framing element of it is hidden away somehow. And of course, if you're not on the high street and you don't have a shop window, as I don't myself, then you use your website and your social media to be your virtual shop window instead. What you're doing with your shop front, whether it's virtually or actually on the high street, is you're setting the scene for the kind of company you are, and you're giving customers an idea of the kind of cost they're likely to be faced with when they walk through the door, so it can reduce the sticker shock. Go to the next one, Matt. Thank you. So then, thinking about the environment, you want to put your customer at ease when they come into your shop. So it's very important that you think about these 3 points. The interpersonal skills. You want to be friendly, you want to be welcoming. It doesn't matter how much they're disturbing you in the middle of a complicated and intricate job, you mustn't give that impression across to them. And of course, if you need a minute to finish something in your workshop, then just say so. Most people are intrigued by that, happy to wait, will ask you what kind of things you're doing. Some of the things that you want to know, for example, hear about how did you hear about the shop, you'll pop that into the conversation usually as you go along. You'll know when there's the right time to ask that kind of thing is, and the most likely one is when you're putting their information into the database so that you can start getting those metrics. But make sure that it's clear that you have the time to help them. A lot of people, when they walk in, are very nervous, so they'll ask for something simple like a white mount and a black frame because they don't know what else to ask, and you can guide them beyond that. You want them to be comfortable. So if they've got young children and they're worried about them in a workshop situation, have a gate or a door between your workshop and customer area, and a few toys there can help. Chairs, sofas, all these things help. Older children these days tend to amuse themselves with their phones, so they're less of an issue. As for drinks, that's a hit and miss one. So some people think it's okay, some don't. In some situations it's a good idea and some it's not. You will know what will work in your own place, but if you do have them, then make sure you keep that area clean and tidy. And of course, for comfort, make sure the area is nice and warm in the winter and cool in the summer. And then you come on to the story, and this is really the best bit. This is where you start doing what you do as your job. You're finding out the emotional reason, the good, the bad for them getting it framed. And of course, they wouldn't be there in your shop with you otherwise. And finding that out can also help guide you on the likely budget. So if it's something from Aunt Gertrude that they're only putting up on the wall because she's coming to visit, they're not going to want to spend a fortune. But if it's something precious from a different family member, they're more likely to want to spend the money. So tell me about it is a good opening. Tell me why you've brought this in. Tell me what it means to you. And think back to the open, closed and probing questions that Matt talked about just a little bit earlier to help with the flow of that discussion. On the next one, Matt. Thank you. So the all-important thing, and this is something that gets asked an awful lot, where do we go with price? So the quote we've got up here, don't find customers for your products, find products for your customers. You want to be thinking about the kind of clientele you want, the kind of customers you want in your shop, and you want to be having the kind of things on your wall and in your displays that are appropriate for that. And it's always best not to start with price if you can help it. You want to start with the design. So have a look at the thing, the tick boxes on there, leaving it to the end and so on. So if you choose mouldings that you like to put on the wall, it's a lot easier to sell them. And if you then choose ranges to complement each other and some slightly wacky out there ones to spark a conversation, that's great as well. For retail, I always believe it's important that you should never just choose based on price per metre. Customers aren't going to necessarily choose like that, and nor should you. And you never judge or presume what someone will pay. Even if they say they don't want to spend a lot, which a lot of people do, That could be £10, £100 or £1,000. You don't know, so you shouldn't presume. Sometimes the customer will come in and they'll tell you their exact budget or range, so that's easy to work with. Sometimes they deliberately won't. So in those cases, particularly go with design all the way, and then you can work back to the price that they're willing to pay. Don't jump in with discounts, change the design to change the price first. And always offer the glass options, all those different glass options to every single customer, because price isn't always going to be the deciding factor on that one. And most importantly, don't be afraid to value the work you do and charge accordingly for your time and your expertise, as well as the quality of the products that you're actually using. You always have the option of going back onto cheaper options. You can have on special offer if you need to clear stock as another option for you there. So the kind of questions you're going to ask, and a lot of these points are pulled directly from that article. So you've got the first three here: where will it hang, decor and style, and taste. They kind of all go together, and that's you getting the background information from your customer. You're finding out the environment it will be in. So for example, if they've got a starkly modern house, you'll look at different options than if they have a twee country cottage. So general questions will give you some guidance on that. You could ask them if it's for them personally. For some artists who come in, it might be for them to sell on. It could be something that someone's giving as a gift. All that will help guide the choices you make and potentially the budget they're likely to want to spend. You can also ask them what their personal style or taste is. And of course, if they had any ideas already in mind for it, they might be trying to match up to something they already have, for example, if they've got a set of pictures. But it goes back again to being very open to listening. So you're getting information from them all the time. And the last point on there is the standards. And this is something that can be quite important as part of the design process. So the Fine Art Trade Guild has 5 levels of framing, and an awful lot of framers, whether they're members or not, work to those standards, and that can drive the design. So from the 5 standards, you choose the right one to work to, and you're going to have that discussion with your customer. You're going to find out if they want something basic and simple, for example, a poster into a ready-made frame, then you would work to that level. If they want a full conservation job, then you can go through those choices. The mount boards you will be able to use might change. The colour options will be wider or more limited depending on what level you work to. So for example, if you're using the museum level boards, the rag boards, then you're going to be reduced much more in the number of colours that you've got and so on. But you can also then talk about the techniques you can use and why, depending on the levels you're working to. And of course, you can go through your glass options with UV and AR glass and some of the fantastic products that are out there on the market now. And you make your recommendations as the professional that they're getting their advice from. If you have your glass specifiers on the wall, and Larson-Juhl for their glass options have those readily available that you can get from them, put those on the wall amongst your moulding. So as your customer is going through the moulding options and they're glancing around at your walls, they are seeing those specifiers. The AR and UV glass almost sells itself by doing that. Remember that you are the professional and they are coming to you for your knowledge and your skill. So what we have here are the wheel of where you go with the reactions. You're keeping an eye on your customer and you're making judgments of what you should be offering and the discussions that you should be having. And the first thing, number 1 up here, is the reaction to the mouldings and the mount board. Customers will quite often pause. They might not actually say anything out loud, but you can see from their body language, you can see whether they're liking something, they're unsure, or they really dislike it. And quite often it's easier to find out what they don't like to get to what they do, especially if they say, I have no idea what I want, try a whole load of different things and you'll usually get there. And encourage them to be honest with you. Tell them that you're not going to be offended if they say they don't like something that you've put down as a design. You'd rather know from them honestly. What we tend to do is we grab a whole load of samples and we ask for a gut reaction, a yes, no, or maybe. And that comes down to the number 2, which is the too much choice. Some framers will tell you they never offer more than 3 options because it can be confusing. So what you do is you keep them in to one side, you don't show the customer all of them, and you work your way through them. And you can then take the discarded ones straight off and put them back on the wall, and it starts to whittle the options down. Going down through number 3, the curveball options, sometimes a wacky choice actually really works. And more importantly, you're going to gauge a customer's reaction to it. So something that's a little bit off to one side that you might not normally have done, give them that option as well. You never know where it might lead with the discussion. So it's always worth doing that. Then coming around to number 4, the unsure customer. And quite often people will say, I'm not sure, not again because they don't like the design, but because they're not sure how much it might cost them. So sometimes you might need to get the price element dealt with at that point. But it's always worth looking at similar options. So if it is on price, you can always say, well, actually, there's this moulding that is a similar look, but it's a cheaper option. And then that gives them the chance to say, no, they prefer the first one, and so on. So make sure that you are meeting the requirements of what it is they're unsure about, and that you do ask those probing questions to find out a bit more of what it is in more detail. When it comes down to number 5, involving the client, the main thing you need to put across is that they understand that all of this process is about what they want, not what you want. You as the professional can give your opinions, but at the end of the day, it is going to hang on their wall, not yours. So they need to know that, and you can reassure them on that. But then do make sure that you give them the reassurance by telling them that it is a good choice when they do decide, because that will help alleviate their doubts when they're driving away from your shops, especially if it's one of the first times they've had something made bespoke, because not everyone can envisage how the complete piece will look, and that nod from you that it will be okay, that it will look good, can calm that apprehension. And then we come on to number 6, which is reviewing your range. Keep an eye on the trends in your own sales, as well as the trends in interior design and other things that are out there on the market. Don't stick with the same old, try new things. Do something to freshen it up every now and then. Take on things that you're not 100% sure about, but you're going to give it a go, and make sure that you do review regularly the range that you have on offer. Because these days, with the availability of the chop service and buying things by length, it is so easy to keep a good and varied range without being overwhelmed with stock. And that time with your customer is absolutely time well spent. But it is important that you price that time into your business model. And the time with the customer can be quite time consuming in your day. But once you get into the swing of the process of how to ask those questions, how to read the reactions, and to go through, then you will find that the process will run quite smoothly and that you can control it fairly well. People want the experience when they choose something bespoke. So make sure they feel of value to the time that you give them. They mustn't feel rushed. But you must also have your techniques to move it along and draw it to a close so that it doesn't overwhelm your day. And your labour charge should cover the time spent talking to your customers within the hourly rate that you charge for your framing services. So it's important, if you don't have a pricing software, that you take this into account. With most pricing softwares now, they have a system for you uploading your costs and everything else and working that hourly rate out for you. But make sure that you are properly covered for the time you spend during the day doing all the things that aren't physically framing, actually creating, making, cutting mounts and putting things together. Make sure the rest of that time is accounted for. Value what you do, because the only thing that none of us can buy is more time. So it's important that we use it carefully and get paid for it properly. And make sure that if you do specialist services such as hand finishing on bare woods, or more advanced textiles, or more advanced conservation work and so on, make sure that you are accounting for that properly in your labour costs. So then we come to the inappropriate decisions. Is the customer always right? And of course, you might be screaming inside your head that no, they're not, but of course you can't verbalize that. And as framers, we sometimes have to manage those situations. So be honest if it doesn't look right. Try and steer them onto a better choice. And you don't have to do that by saying, no, that's wrong. You just say, okay, well, have you thought about this option, and have you tried this one, and why don't we have a look at this combination? And you can steer them in other directions. But what we always have to remember is that some people's taste is very different from our own. Some people like clashing colours, they like things that are just that little bit bizarre and wacky, and it will hang on their wall, not yours. You only have to look at it while it's in the workshop. So it is their opinion that matters as much as anything. However, if they are asking something that's inappropriate because it will harm the artwork, then that's the moment for you to step back into that professional mode of explaining why, and to see if they will allow you to use a different method or material. If they're asking you to do something that you're not happy with, for example, trimming a limited edition print, then you could explain to them why that's a bad idea. But if they insist, then you have the option to either turn down the job or to get them to sign a disclaimer saying that they were given all the advice, but they chose to go down that path. It's very important that you remember that you shouldn't be afraid to turn down a job if you're not happy to do it, and that it is important always to safeguard your professional reputation. And the last slide from me today, before we do the Q&A, is to talk about life after the current lockdown. This is, for all of us, a very unusual, very unsettling time. And I know that in our own business, we've had a lot of feedback from customers, which has been really good, and looking forward to us getting back to some sort of normality. Information is key. We have seen it from our own supplier members sending emails and communications out, but also from supermarkets and elsewhere. Information for customers to have confidence. It's all about reassurance and staying safe. And for our own businesses, we can do the same. So be clear on your website, your social media, or your shop window notices, steps that you're taking that can reassure your customers. If you can get hold of any hand sanitizer, you can have that on the counter for them. You can wear gloves when you're handling work, and making sure you're cleaning down surfaces, marking the 2-meter distancing on the floor, limit the number of customers in your shop. See if you can adjust your design desk, maybe to stand one side of it with your customer, the other side to distance you, or to have a perspex screen up at your till area. We see plenty of those in shops these days. And make sure that your customers don't handle your samples for a while. Using contactless or card payments or internet banking where possible. And you can, of course, arrange collections to the car. So somebody could call you and say, I'm outside. You can take the work out to them, pop it in the car. They can stay safe inside. You may even need to do collection points for a while, deliver to people's porches, or to have somewhere safe where you can leave things for them to collect from. If you are going to be using your own car for deliveries and you don't normally do that, then do make sure that your car insurance covers you for business use. And of course, appointments are far more likely to be popular once we start getting back to some sort of normality. Calendly, which you can see up on the screen, is a free option that you can get going with. Facebook also has an appointment option. And you may want to reduce your official opening hours or days for a while between appointments. Of course, none of this can come into place yet until the government has given us the okay as non-essential businesses to open back up again, but it doesn't hurt to get things in place and be prepared. So in conclusion to that, we're approaching a very different style of retail environment, and we need to move with it and be flexible in our approach, and to continue then to be able to offer a full design service to our customers. And with that, Matt, I will hand you over for the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Jo. That was excellent. I'm going to come, let me get off video so you can see me. I'll ask you to do the same. Thank you.
Hello.
So, cool. So I'll give you a few seconds to recover, and then we'll we'll crack into some of the questions, and I'll try and help you with some of them as well as we go through. So, got one from Keith Gilson. Keith asks, with the masses of mouldings available, how do you select and manage chevrons and keep them fresh?
We have, we always go through whenever people are showing us new, and we go through the latest releases that come through from companies, and we simply pick the ones that we think will work with our current ranges, are fitting in with the kind of styles that we know are going to be coming through in popularity. So we're looking at trends and things going on, and we like to have a good mix. So if somebody produces a moulding range and we've already got something almost identical to it, we would pass on that. And then we would just do a nice mix. So we don't have walls and walls are very similar. We have a really eclectic mix of all sorts of different things. Because we also do hand finishing, an awful lot of it, Alec is very big on that side. Our range is even bigger than most people's. So we can sort of fit the hand finishing to one side and say, right, well, that covers that spectrum. So with the factory finish mouldings that we buy from suppliers, then we're looking for something very different from them.
Cool, thank you. And I guess just to add to that from my side, it was one of the things that surprised me a little bit was just the amount of range, particularly on mouldings that we do have available. It's vast, and it can be a little bit confusing and complex just with the amount that there are there. I mean, the other bit of advice from me is to just try and put some designated time aside, maybe each month, to try and do it. It's another thing that sometimes we just don't get done with all the busy things that we've got going on in our day. And from us at Larson-Juhl, any of you that are nearby to the office, we've got a showroom there. You're more than welcome to come by, or even if you're a bit further out, then feel free to come and visit us, and I'll come and meet you, and we can have a cup of tea and coffee, and you can have a look around our office. It may be a little bit different when we get out of this environment in terms of how we do that, but we are still planning to have that showroom available for you.
Can I just say, if people do get the chance to go and see it, it's definitely worth seeing. We've been up and viewed it a few times. It's a bit like a massive sweetie shop. You just want everything that's on the wall. It's about being selective. It's about being sensitive about the ranges that you know will give you a broad spectrum. So it's very easy to get overwhelmed and go for too many. We have a rule that if we cannot put it on the wall, we don't take the range, because there's no point having it in a box underneath the counter. So if you're going to put it on the wall, you have to think about what you might take off the wall to allow for space for it. But definitely, if you get the chance to go to the showroom, then do so.
Cool. Okay, thank you. The next one I've got here is, do you have a leaflet that tells the customer about how to care for the frame product when they get it home, cleaning, where to place the artwork in the house, etc.?
Yes, we do. We get ours. It's actually sponsored and supported by Larson-Juhl, but it is produced for the Fine Art Trade Guild as a member and as a GCF qualified framer. We're able to get those leaflets, and every single one of our customers gets those. It's called the Frame for Good leaflet. Would you like me to go and grab one?
Yes, please. Yeah, be great.
Sorry, short interlude. So this is the Frame for Good leaflet that we provide to every customer, and it goes through how to look after it, the levels of framing, talks about aftercare and so on, and every single person gets that with their receipt from us when they leave the shop.
Cool, great, thank you. Steve's asked here, how long on average do people use in a design consultation? Maybe a tricky one to answer because it might be different depending on
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's the matter of a few minutes. If it's somebody that we know very well and we know their style, they'll just bring it in and say, right, you know what you're doing, get on with it. Other people, it can take a long time. It depends on the project. If it's a more complicated project, it can be anything up to an hour. But for most people, it's sort of 20 minutes is an average, I would say.
Cool. Okay, thank you. And then Daniel's asked a question here. I think he asked this before you got to this point, so I think we did cover this. But do you reassure them that they've made a good choice, even if you think it really isn't? If you can tell them, why should you?
It's a difficult one. If you really don't like the choice, it's very hard to say, I think that's a great choice. But what you can do is turn it back and say, that's what you love. And if you're going to love that, then you'll be happy with it on the wall. So rather than you saying, I love that, or I really approve of that, which is clearly not going to be true because you don't, you give them the reassurance that the choice they've made for themselves is going to be the right one.
Okay, thank you. Got one here. Sometimes customers take a long time to decide what they want, which can be difficult with other customers in the shop. How would you recommend dealing with that?
Well, we're quite lucky because we have the two of us, so and you don't often get 3 or 4, but it does happen. But we have somewhere comfy for them to sit. We have magazines for them to read if they're having to wait. And what we will always do is make sure that the customer we are with is reassured that they're not being rushed, but we will tweak our questioning and we will just make sure that we're not opening ourselves up to great long discussions. We'll keep things a little bit tighter in the discussion, whilst at the same time appearing to be very calm and have all the time in the world. But it's always good then to just make sure that you catch the eye of the person that's waiting, make sure that you're greeting them properly, and that you're reassuring them that you'll be with them as soon as you can, and just to have a seat, and that's fine.
Okay, thank you. I like this one. So, and I'm sure you've had this situation. No. So how would you cope with a couple that were disagreeing on what option to go for?
Oh, that happens all the time, all the time. Right, I know this is going to sound horribly sexist, and I'm sure that there are plenty of people listening who are going to pick me up on this. But I tend to look at the woman's face more than the man's face, because it tends to be in a couple situation that the woman is the one who's going to get the emotional connection to it. And if she doesn't like it, it isn't happening. So if they really disagree, you literally take a step back and you allow them to have that discussion, and you don't get involved, because if you try to get in the middle of it, you're going to make friends with one and the other one's going to hate you. So you just have to take a step back and allow them to work it out for themselves. And if they ask your advice, you give your very professional opinion. You don't get into the emotion of it at all, and you don't appear to be siding with anybody.
Cool. And I think for those of you who were on the session that Manny done, then if you think back to that, there was a section in that where he talked about men and women, and in terms of the way that they look at social media. And I think that very much supports what you said there about, you know, looking to the female first for that reaction and gauging that. I think that's good advice.
Usually the man just wants to get out of there as fast as possible.
That's my experience, personal experience. So I've got one here. How do you answer the framer in the next town has quoted £20 cheaper to frame this football shirt? So that type of situation where they're playing you off against someone else.
I just accept that, okay, that's what they've quoted you, this is my price. I don't get into a bartering, I don't get into a discussion on it. Every single framer is pricing for different reasons. Some people price a football shirt really high because they hate doing them. Some people price them far cheaper because they love doing them. I will never discuss that. It's like, well, okay, well, I don't know exactly what they've quoted you on. It could be comparing apples and oranges. This is what I'm prepared to quote you on. What they choose to do with that is up to them.
Okay. I've got one here going back to mouldings. How do you feel about grouping mouldings in ranges rather than colour?
That's exactly what we do. We group in ranges always. Yeah, it's I understand why people do it in colour, and in fact when we very first opened we did tend to do it a little bit in colour because we weren't having whole ranges, so you might have 1 or 2 mouldings, and so it was easier to do them in colour. As a general rule, ours are always in ranges and then down by size, so you'll have all the big ones and the medium sized ones and the small ones from that range. That's just how we prefer to do it. I think it gives a better appearance on the wall because it doesn't give you these big blocks of colour. It makes it look more interesting, and it's actually easier to put them away again after you've taken them all off the wall because you're just putting it back in its range. Easy to find.
Okay. And then John's asked, hi Joe, you mentioned moving a sale along when it's taken up too much time. I struggle with this. What techniques do you use?
It goes back to what you were talking about, the different kind of question that you can ask. So you're not then going to be looking at probing questions and open questions. You're going to start giving them closed questions. So then you start make sure that there's hardly any choice for them to look at. You get them down to maybe the last 2. If I've got somebody who really can't choose a mount colour, for example, and I tend to start with mount colour and then go out to moulding, they can't choose a mount colour, I might leave 2 or 3 options down and say, right, well, we'll try it with the moulding. They will then naturally go to the mount colour they prefer when they start putting moulding chevrons against it. So then you say, so are we going to discount that one? Yes or no? Yeah, we are. And you start taking it away. And the more you take away, the better it is. You need to stay in control of your mount chevrons. You need to stay in control of your moulding chevrons. The minute you let them in there, then you've lost control of the situation. So it's all about those closed questions at the end.
Okay, thank you. And then Martin's put, as part of your consultation, do you discuss the method of securing the artwork to the wall, particularly when it's a heavier picture? Sometimes concerned that they might just be using a simple hook when you need a more substantial fit in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always amazed how many customers are surprised that you've put any fixings on the back of their picture for them to be able to hang it on the wall. So one of the things we always say when we're talking about prices, and that will be ready for you to hang on the wall, all you need to do is put a hook on or whatever. If it's something that's more unusual where you're going to want a different kind of a fixing, we will have that discussion. And actually, being down in Devon, it's something that we do have to do every now and then, because down here we have houses made out of cob, which is a very difficult substance to actually hang pictures from. So it's the kind of discussion that when I lived in London, I would never, because it was, it's Metroland, everybody had lovely, normal, semi-detached houses. But you have those discussions with your customer about the wall that it's going to be hanging on. Is there anything in particular we need to be worried about? So you would then go through the fixings. Some customers, they want particular types of fixings used. And again, it's good to have those discussions at the design process, but it's right at the very end. You will just add a note to the order to make sure that you're doing something right.
Okay. And this is a really interesting question and probably links a little bit to what I was talking about at the start of the presentation. Steve's asked, are all of your choices based on design rather than what works for your business? I try to sell what I can make money from, which isn't always going to be the best design. That is a really interesting, probably dilemma.
I think I know which Steve it is asking that question. Is it always on design? I would say for bespoke, most of it is on design. Yes, probably 99% of it is on design. We have artist customers that we work with where we are working to particular specifications for them because they have set mouldings that they use and so on and so forth. And we have some galleries that we work with where, again, it can be a little bit more price driven. So you're working to a spec that's slightly different. But from a bespoke point of view, yes, we are design led as much as possible because that's what we're about.
Okay, thank you. Lorraine's asked, what would you suggest to showcase your framing online?
I simply use it. We don't have an online selling portal. We've steered away from that. We simply use it as a shop window. And what we've done online is from our website is there's a few examples on there, but we're telling people a lot about ourselves. Our social media feed is where we put projects that we've worked on. We will do step by step for some of the more complicated things and show them the construction process. But we show lots of examples and we'll talk about the materials like the AR glass that we use and so on and so forth. So it's really showcasing the things that you were saying, look at this, I can do this, why don't you bring me your version of that to frame? So you're using it as your shop window.
Okay, thank you. And I have had some questions actually recently from customers who've been asking about framing online and whether we have any software that can actually help customers from home put in their requirements and upload their artwork. It's actually something that our colleagues out in the US do have. They do have a piece of software on the US website, which you could actually go and have a look at. And we are exploring it at the moment, whether there's options for us in the UK to come and bring that over here and help support you. So watch this space and I'll communicate any progress with that we do have.
I think it's one of those ones that, whereas a few years ago, very few people wanted to get into it because it was perceived in a certain way. I think especially with the recent lockdown and the changes that are happening at the moment, more and more people are looking at it as an option. I don't know that technology wise I'm the right person to be going down that route at the moment, so it's probably something that once it's a bit more mainstream we may look into it, but we're going to avoid it as long as possible because technology wise I'm not the greatest.
Cool. Okay, I've got one here from Justin who said, how do you deal with telephone requests for a rough price?
What I tend to do is would say to them, the last one of those we did was about. So if it's how much is it going to be to frame a football shirt, I will say, well, the last couple we did were about this. And of course, it's going to vary depending on moulding and glass you use and everything else, but that's a ballpark figure. Most people, they simply want to find out if you're friendly, if you're welcoming, if you're going to be dismissive of them. So it's always good to be as helpful as possible. Some of them, they come through as jobs and some of them don't, but it's always better just to give a ballpark figure and explain that because it's bespoke, you can't be specific.
Okay. And then Jan at Mitre-Man has asked, what pricing program do you recommend? Have you got one that you use that you recommend?
We do, but do you want me to? Okay. Well, we use Framiac. We've used that for quite a few years now, and as people who are not very technology minded, that was a very good system for us to use. Mark Wilson, who promotes that, he was great helping us set it up and getting it sorted, and we've been able to personalize it. But there are loads out there on the market now. There are ones that are cloud-based as well, because we have to do all our backups every night remotely and so on. So you've got cloud-based ones and all sorts now. So there's loads out on the market to choose from. And again, it just comes down to personal choice, what's going to work for your specific business.
Cool. And got one from Justin who says, do you choose the moulding before looking at the mounts?
No, as I said earlier, I tend to start inside out. So I tend to start with the mount and then work out. I will occasionally choose the frame first, but it's unusual to do that.
Okay, a couple more and then we'll wrap this session up. So during the winter and particularly Christmas period, do you recommend leaving your store lights on overnight as a 24/7 advertisement with new low-cost bulbs, or do you see that as a security risk?
I'm not on the high street, so it's not an issue for us. We have a big roller shutter, so nobody can see in when it's night time for us. But if you're on the high street, yes, if you can do, low watt LEDs at night as an advert. A lot of people put it on a timer because you'll get people walking through in the evening, but then in the dead of night, you don't necessarily want it on. So you could put something on a timer so it goes off at sort of 11 or midnight or something like that as an option. Yeah, I don't see any harm in it, but check with your insurers that they will be happy with that potentially.
Good point. And then the last one I can actually answer, it must have been from someone who joined a little bit after we started, just asked about whether the webinars will be put on the website to view back, which they will do. I've had a few people ask me that question, and we're planning to get them uploaded early next week, and we'll send out a link to everybody to let you know where they are. And as I said previously, we'll have a survey that will follow after Tuesday afternoon session to get your feedback on the webinars, and also a bit broader than that, we'll ask a few other questions to provide us with some information that can help us decide what we do in the future.
Can I just mention the CPD points? Is that all right?
Of course.
Yeah, so if you are a GCF framer who's part of the CPD program, every single webinar gives you 2 self-led points. So everyone you've listened to, you can have 2 self-led points for on your record that you write in. There will be some questions published by the Guild after all the webinars have finished next week. And if you answer those questions and send your responses into fsqc@fineart.co.uk, you will convert your self-led ones to verified points.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks, Joe. Okay, that wraps it up for today's webinar. Thanks to Joe. Thank you, everybody who's attended, and have a great weekend.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.